Hello everyone. Today we are going to again read Samuel Johnson, but now as a philosopher. Even though he is considered a philosopher in general, but this time round we are going to read one of his essays that deals directly with philosophy and even mentions some philosophers while simplifying their positions so that a layman can digest them. We are going to read his essay entitled Man Does Not Always Think. The title itself betrays the themes he would discuss in the essay. It has something to do with thinking, but not just that. It has something to do with thinking always. As you can judge from the previous videos, Johnson begins with a general assumption about a topic that is worthy of probing and then breaks it down and reflects upon it. So let's begin with the problem that concerns him in this essay. It is assumed that we think from cradle to grave. And furthermore, since Descartes famously claimed cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, it is understood that existence and thinking are almost synonymous. In fact, not just synonymous, but thinking is also considered that special act specific to anything human. That is to say, the particular act that makes us human is thinking. So, with all of this philosophical baggage in his mind, Johnson wants to clarify that we are wrong in assuming this philosophical standard. Why so? If we do try and collapse all that we do in the act of thinking, then obviously we come up with a lot of examples where it is not clear whether we think always or not. Like, for example, are we thinking when we are watching television? Or are you thinking right now precisely at the moment when you are listening to me? Perhaps yes, perhaps not. If you are thinking, then you are not listening. And if you are listening, then you are not thinking now. Or should we consider listening to be an extended act of thinking? The same applies to watching television. We may think after watching television or perhaps a bit while watching, but it does not seem likely that when we become a passive observer and let the senses transmit the information to the brain, during this time we are not thinking. In fact, it seems that we choose to not think so that the noise outside of us can get inside, which comes usually with some information providing food for thought. It will be later munched upon by our minds as fodder for reflection. There seems to be a momentary lapses in our stream of consciousness during which we do not think. Otherwise said, there are certain moments when we choose to suspend our thinking process. Perhaps this is what concerns Johnson. Let's stop this labyrinth of thought process and bathe in the wisdom of the sage himself. Johnson begins with a question that every one of us has asked at least once in our lives. A daily instance, which occurs when we are in a philosophical mood and inquire about questions that seem stupid, but which become catalysts for deep reflection. He commences, quote open, when man sees one of the inferior creatures perched upon a tree or basking in the sunshine, without any apparent endeavor or pursuit, he often asks himself or his companion on what that animal can be supposed to be thinking. Quote close. First of all, does not it seem a bit uplifting that we seem less stupid to ourselves now? Because we have created this big schism between us and the great minds, that they think about the great mysteries of the world, and we little unknown beings only spend time reflecting upon the chirping and thoughts of a bird. Johnson breaks the ice with the reader by introducing a childish reverie that each one of us has in our leisure time, and so does he. He is also as simple a human as we are. But the only difference is that he is bold enough to be transparent about his thoughts, because he knows that there is no such thing as a stupid question, And most of all, those questions that arise in our heads most of the times during our daily lives, these are not stupid questions. It is just that we do not know the direction these thoughts must take so that we can also become a bit wiser. Or maybe we are so lethargic that we drop these reveries as soon as they arise because we consider them to lead us nowhere. Anyways, I am also getting lost. Need to get back on track quickly. Since Johnson's times, there have been many researchers, especially because of our better understanding of animal rights and their inner beings, who have inquired about questions like these. Does my dog feel happiness the same way as I do? Do cats have emotions equivalent to that of humans? And the questions do not stop there, they go on. These are not trivial questions. But the problem was almost put to bed by Wittgenstein when he said that even if a lion could speak, we would never be able to understand a word of him. Their perceptive faculties are designed to map the world on their mind with a different mental mapping than humans. For example, if we take a honeybee and we enter the garden when it is also present there, we both have a sunflower in front of us. The bee sees it through the spectrum of ultraviolet rays, while we perceive it on a different wavelength of light. It does not see the yellow of the flower, while we do not perceive it as an emitter of ultraviolet rays. So we cannot really know on what the bird has directed its thoughts exactly. Neither is Johnson disturbed about it. His essay is not about bees, it is about humans. So his narration continues. Quote open. Of this question, since neither bird nor beast can answer it, we must be content to live without the resolution. We know not how much the brutes recollect of the past or anticipate of the future, what power they have of comparing and preferring, and whether their faculties may not rest in motionless indifference till they are moved by the presence of the proper object, or stimulated to act by corporal sensations. Quote close. There are, according to Johnson, gradations of consciousness in natural beings. The hierarchy of beings was created by Aristotle when he explained that first of all, there are animate and inanimate beings. Inanimate beings do not possess the ability of sensory perception and they cannot move by themselves. Nonetheless, the animate beings possess the ability of movement by desires or by their own volition. But amongst animate beings, it is only humans whose actions are judged as good or bad because they act according to their own volition, whereas a wolf is never brought to the court for having killed a cub. Which highlights the fact that Johnson is trying to explain that animals are stimulated by corporal sensations. When they smell, see, or hear their prey, they have no other aim but to attack it and satiate their immediate desire of hunger. This is the desire that humans share with the animal kingdom. But with that, there is also the element of voluntary action that puts the humans at the top of hierarchy of animate beings. Nevertheless, Johnson is not here to talk about the animal world. He is concerned with the explication of this being that we call human. Therefore, he considers these questions regarding the phenomenology of animal experience superfluous talk to talk about at this moment. Neither are they resolvable. This must remind us that when there is a certain topic about which we can only string together nothing but a few hypotheses, then we should refrain from talking about it, as it would only be equivalent to shooting the arrows in the dark, expending our mental energy on inquiries that hardly can be understood and that cannot be solved by the human mind. This is the reason the Human Intellectual Project has produced some ironic results. For example, we know more about the surface of the moon than the surface of the sea. Think about it. We look more towards the sky and the planets above than this world, which is our home, only because our curiosity to find life on other planets is more pronounced as compared to our desire to preserve life on this planet. We need to direct our attention in philosophical inquiries to the stuff that matter here and now. As Camus said, the stuff that we touch, the stuff that I feel, the stuff that I smell, the stuff that I taste. Johnson confirms our doubts and turns his attention towards us humans. He is fed up of these hypotheses regarding other species. His interest lies in the human species, as he explains, quote open. I am the less inclined to these superfluous inquiries because I have always been able to find sufficient matter for curiosity in my own species. It is useless to go far in quest of that which may be found at home. A very narrow circle of observation will supply a sufficient number of men and women who might be asked with equal propriety on what they can be thinking. Quote close. He asks this question not from an animal but from a human. We are more interested in knowing what does our fellow beings think about. Or as Johnson is more interested in, do they really always think about something? So let's see what he found amongst this species. He continues with an air of disappointment. Quote open. It is reasonable to believe that thought, like everything else, has its causes and effects, that it must proceed from something known, done, or suffered, and must produce some action or event. Yet how great is the number of those in whose minds no source of thought has ever been opened, in whose life no consequence of thought is ever discovered, who have learned nothing upon which they can reflect, who have neither seen nor felt anything which could leave its traces on the memory, who neither foresee nor desire any change in their condition, and have therefore neither fear, hope, nor design, and yet are supposed to be thinking beings. Quote close. Every thought has a source. If we remember our childhood memory, there is some internal or external manifestation that forces us to think about it. For example, if we suddenly look at a flower and are taken back to our childhood when the first time our grandmother gave it to us, or if we see an unfortunate accident on the highway road, we might be reminded of a dear friend whom we lost one day in the same manner. There must be some motivation that propels our thoughts in a certain direction, as if we have the capability to think always, but it has to be enlivened with a certain catalyst provided by our experience of the inner or the outer world. Having explained this now, we encounter something astonishing. Compared to the question that we asked earlier, that do animals think or what do they think about, this time our object of inquiry, who is supposed to provide an interesting answer to the same question, actually disappoints us. Because as Johnson explained, at least when we spend time thinking about the animal kingdom, we assume that they must be thinking about something. But look here in the human kingdom, we have people, in fact a large number of them, who do not seem to think at all. We begin to question ourselves, how is that possible? There is a clear answer to that. There has to be a source of thought, as said earlier. It means that if there is no source, this mental act, which is all too human, is never activated. It remains passive in the face of the humdrum of life. Our minds have the willpower to not think as well, but it certainly begs another question. How come our minds can stay silent? Camus explains this through an example of contrast between a cobbler and a king. He says that a cobbler also lives for 20 years and a king also lives for 20 years. But it is more likely that the cobbler actually lives for 20 years and the king actually dies for 20 years. The cobbler goes around the street watching people, observing their manners, thinking all the time about the world around him. Whereas the king hardly has time to get out of his enclosed chamber, dying of the smell of his fragrances. It is the experience that matters. What have we amassed in our heads to think about? A cow stores all its food by taking in as much as it could and then slowly digest it throughout the day. The animal kingdom is smarter than us. We need to open our eyes and observe the world around us, experience it to the fullest, read it like a book, live every moment of it, and then we will hardly have time to put our mind to rest. We need to become real thinkers. Those who are awake during the day and think throughout the night. On the contrary, what we find, sadly, according to Johnson, is that we are usually more of a sleepwalker than an observer. Even though the phenomenology of our thoughts does not allow for a second to stay at rest, as Johnson explains. Quote open. To every act, a subject is required. He that thinks must think upon something. But tell me, ye that peers deepest into nature, ye that take the widest surveys of life, inform me, kind shades of Malebranche and of Locke, what that something can be, which excites and continues thought in maiden aunts with small fortunes, in younger brothers that live upon annuities, in traders retired from business, in soldiers absent from their regiment, or in widows that have no children. Quote close. This is interesting. Anyone acquainted with philosophy or psychology reading this quote might be a bit surprised after having read this. Because here Johnson is explaining the fundamental principle of a philosophical movement that would come to be known as phenomenology proper in the 19th century. Brentano is called the father of phenomenology, and rightly so. Just two names are enough to underscore his importance on the intellectual landscape of the 20th century, who were his students, Sigmund Freud and Edmund Husserl. They both became the towering figures of the 20th century, expanding upon Brentano's intentionality thesis. Now, what is that? It is simply what Johnson explains here. The intentionality thesis, which is the cornerstone of phenomenology, says that there cannot be any mental act without an object towards which that act is directed. There can be nothing loved without something being loved. There can be nothing hated without something being hated. In short, there can be no thought without an intentional object. Hardly anyone today takes Johnson's name in the universities where phenomenology is taught. He is virtually unknown in the academic circles of phenomenology, and rightly so. For Johnson, these fundamental philosophical truths about how humans conduct themselves in the world are derived from common sense and experience. Johnson did not attend any Brentano's class, neither could he, by the way, because he would die 50 years before even Brentano was born. Though phenomenology was formalized in Austria in the 19th century, but it is not a new truth that suddenly came to light. It was always there, and those who observed humans well, like Johnson, found it after just a little bit of thought. Philosophy is not a study of human thought separated from the world. We all are philosophers. All we need to do is think. But it has been unfortunately bogged down by the superfluous questioning attitude that misses the whole point and joy of inquiry. And Johnson does not hold himself back against these academicians. He asks these so-called professional philosophers who have hard earned their doctorate after reading all their lives the treatises and essays of Locke and Malebranche, can they answer his question? Can they inform him about the source of thought in humans? Have they ever thought about it? They are missing life as much as they assume that they are thinking. Knowing that he would not get any answer from them, he actually informs them why they do not have the answer. He is unforgiving while giving the following judgment. Quote open. Life is commonly considered as either active or contemplative. But surely this division, how long soever it has been received, is inadequate and fallacious. There are mortals whose life is certainly not active, or they do neither good nor evil, and whose life cannot be properly called contemplative. For they never attend either to the conduct of men or the works of nature, but rise in the morning, look round them till night in careless stupidity, go to bed and sleep, and rise again in the morning. Quote close. He has put the philosophers on the back foot and forced them to think, are they not the ones who rise in the morning, look around them till night in careless stupidity, go to bed and sleep, and rise again in the morning? To put it simply, have they not made their inquiry a profession that starts in their chamber and ends in it? Are they thinking and writing to understand the world? Or do they have their eyes simply on that publisher who has slyly lulled them to the noise of the world and requested, Write a book on Kant's categorical imperative. Make sure that every side of the argument is well addressed, and we will ensure that the book sells well. While the so called philosopher takes up this task, he enters the chamber and works painstakingly for years amongst the heavy words of the bygone era and comes up astonished. This building was not here before. From where has it emerged? Philosophers are famous for making categories and isms. They want to simplify their inquiries and box humans into theories. Such a behavior can only be laughed at, as we can hear Johnson's silent laughter in his words. It is same as trying to put the chicken back in the egg. Humans give us theories. It is never vice versa. Johnson proves the futility of philosophical speculation in this matter by actually considering their words for what they are worth. He becomes a philosopher for a while and weighs the pros and cons of their arguments. Let's see the philosopher Samuel Johnson at work. Quote open. It has been lately a celebrated question in the schools of philosophy whether the soul always thinks. Some have defined the soul to be the power of thinking, concluded that its essence consists in act, that if it should cease to act, it would cease to be, and that cessation of thought is but another name for extinction of mind. This argument is subtle but not conclusive because it supposes what cannot be proved, that the nature of mind is properly defined. Others affect to disdain subtlety when subtlety will not serve their purpose and appeal to daily experience. We spend many hours, they say, in sleep without the least remembrance of any thoughts which then passed in our minds. And since we can only by our own consciousness be sure that we think, why should we imagine that we have had thought of which no consciousness remains? Quote close. The major problem with philosophers is that they make mistakes in determining what they are inquiring. And not just philosophers, even other scholars like economists and scientists too. If our aim is to explain what is the nature of thought, we cannot assume a bunch of things that we have set out to inquire about. As Johnson clarifies, that the question before the house is the nature of mind, because thinking is a mental act. And since the nature of mind can never be defined, we have to make a set of assumptions regarding it, which becomes the springboard of inquiry and guides it all the way through up until its conclusions. Everything that follows, therefore, in this hypothesis would be based upon the assumption that began the inquiry. That is the major problem according to Johnson. Whatever scholars do not know, they assume, without acknowledging or sometimes even caring to acknowledge that all their assumptions are concocted out of thin air, and only a mere touch of experience and common sense will bring their fancy theoretical architecture down to rubble. Then Johnson continues to provide an example of the Lockean position of personal identity. According to Locke, the continuity of consciousness is provided by memory. It is memory that weaves our experiences together to give us a sense of who we are. Whatever we do not remember does not constitute memory and therefore is not a part of personal identity. Johnson counters this claim by providing a common day experience of sleep. This rupture of consciousness that happens every day in our lives is enough to challenge this theory. Then obviously philosophers go around defending themselves with exceptions and whatnot. But Johnson is clear about his judgment of these far-fetched philosophical theories. They do not have the absolute power to overcome the depth of the nature of mind. And it is not just sleep. Johnson is not yet done with his counter-argument. He further expands on this theory. Quote open. This argument which appeals to experience may from experience be confuted. We every day do something which we forget when it is done, and know to have been done only by consequence. The waking hours are not denied to have been passed in thought, yet he that shall endeavour to recollect one day the ideas of the former will only turn the eye of reflection upon vacancy, He will find that the greater part is irrevocably vanished and wonder how the moments could come and go and leave so little behind them. Quote close. Our span of memory is as much as that of a goldfish. If personal identity is composed of nothing but what we remember, then ourselves, even after living for 60 years, may not even be 60 minutes old. The farce is all too obvious. But Johnson knows that philosophers are crafty. They would attack him left and right and belittle his criticism with a jumble of words of which even Johnson would not be able to make heads or tails. So he let them enjoy their profession with the following words. Quote open. To discover only that the arguments on both sides are defective and to throw back the tenet into its former uncertainty is the sport of wanton or malevolent skepticism, delighting to see the sons of philosophy at work upon a task which never can be decided. I shall suggest an argument hitherto overlooked, which may perhaps determine the controversy. Quote close. Since it is your task, dear philosophers, to inquire about deep stuff, you consider yourself to be the champions of thought. Nothing goes by you, right? Then think about this. Johnson presents the problem thus. Quote open. If it be impossible to think without materials, there must necessarily be minds that do not always think. And whence shall we furnish materials for the meditation of the glutton between his meals, of the sportsman in a rainy month, of the annuitant between the days of quarterly payment, of the politician when the mails are detained by contrary winds? Quote close. If we cannot think without anything being thought, then how do we account for the fact confirmed by daily experience of these beings whom we call humans, who stroll on the streets as empty as a tin box without a thought to offer, without a life to live? Make up assumptions now. Break down your theories further. Include these exceptions and present your thesis to me, demands Johnson. And while the philosophers are busy with this, he comes back to us poor readers, who are by now yawning listening to these heavy, meaningless arguments of philosophers. In the end, Johnson has proven himself right. There are people who do not always think. In fact, there might be people who rejoice at not having thought about the world. And Johnson wants us to at least give this thought a thought. And if we have been yet amongst this thoughtless lot, then tear ourselves away from them and start thinking from now. I conclude with Johnson's conclusion and wish you happy thinking. Quote open. But how frequent soever may be the examples of existence without thought, it is certainly a state not much to be desired. He that lives in torpid insensibility wants nothing of a carcass but putrefaction. It is the part of every inhabitant of the earth to partake the pains and pleasures of his fellow beings. And as in a road through a country desert and uniform, the traveller languishes for want of amusement, so the passage of life will be tedious and irksome to him who does not beguile it by diversified ideas. Quote close. Thank you, everyone.